Well, hello there, and welcome to another episode of Align with Laina. And as you know, I call these episodes Align with Laina because I bring guests who are ordinary people who, just like you, just like me, have gone through an extraordinary spiritual awakening, a shift in consciousness, and we are aligning with something greater. We're aligning with a life force. What doesn't matter what you call it, but we're aligning with a higher truth for ourselves. And from that place, we want to share what we discover with others so that if it helps them, all the better. So today, my guest is Dr. Matt Welsh. And the way I found him is actually my assistant was doing some research for interesting people for me to continue to interview because I've done so many of these interviews. I'm always looking for new, incredible people to share with the community. So today we get to have a conversation. Matt, thank you so much for joining me. This is so exciting for me.
Oh, well, thank you so much for having me on your show. This is really exciting for me. Thank you so much.
Well, what I was so impressed about your website, your blog specifically called is it Spiritual Media Blog? When I was looking through it and looking in some of your interviews, I was struck by the fact that you started a career as an attorney and you felt that there was more to life than just being a lawyer in terms of how you could be in service to humanity. And you literally wanted to help people do whatever work they could do internally for themselves before they ever got to a place where they needed a lawyer to help fix whatever was going on. And when I read that, it's almost like I was so moved because I've been a life coach now for almost 20 years. And I've been helping people work through finding their passion, reconnecting with something inside of them, aligning with God, source, spirit, whatever you want to call it. And the fact that you did this for yourself and made that shift and then created that beautiful blog so that you can help even more people, not only professionally, but also through the gift of your blog, like I do it through the gift of my podcast. Tell me, how did that shift come about for you? Take me internally and share what was going on inside of you that had you make the shift.
Yeah, sure. Well, it definitely did not happen overnight. It was a bit of a process for me. But yeah, I started off working as a lawyer of all places out in Hollywood for an entertainment agency. And I really just didn't feel like I fit in there. I didn't really like the type of work we were doing. I was always interested in like inspirational entertainment or spiritual entertainment, like, What the Bleep or Celestine Prophecy. But they really weren't, a lot of people in mainstream Hollywood weren't really interested in those movies. And it just wasn't a good fit for me. So I wasn't really that happy doing that. So I realized, I want to make more of an impact directly in people's lives. So I went clear across the country back to Indiana in the almost the exact opposite realm, working as a family law attorney for the Department of Child Services, helping abused and neglected children find a safe place to live. And this is a very noble mission, and there's a lot of people who do really good work out there with that, but it just wasn't for me. It was it really weighed on me, my heart, my mind, my soul. You try to do the right thing, but I spent most of my days just arguing. I was arguing with other lawyers, arguing with caseworkers, arguing with judges, with parents, trying to do the right thing, really questioning whether I was, but just sort of realized I'm just not happy doing this. Then tried to go into private practice as a family law attorney, helping people through divorces, child custody issues. And what really I realized at that point is, people were telling me about some of the most difficult experiences of their life, going through a divorce or fighting for child custody. And for me, what I really felt like the best way that I could help them was just to listen to them. but that's not what they were paying me for. But I mean, that's what I like doing. Somebody would tell me about how they really wanted to spend more time with their kid, or they were going through a really tough divorce. And I would just sit there and listen. And they would say, thank you so much for listening. So that got me really interested in counseling. In addition to that, I started getting interested in psychology, mental health. I started doing my own psychotherapy, which I really got a lot of benefit from. And I also realized I'm not happy as a lawyer. There's not really this light at the end of the tunnel for me. But I really was getting interested in psychology and mental health, and had always been interested in like spiritual growth and personal development. So I was trying to look for a way to merge all of these interests. And, at the age of 30, left my job as a lawyer, went back to school, got a PhD in psychology. And now, yeah, I do work full time as a clinical psychologist. I have my own private coaching practice, and also still work on my blog, which helps me to pursue some of these more holistic spiritual interests that I have.
Oh my goodness, I love that. I was taking some notes here because
Yeah.
so many things that I want to touch base on and kind of circle back, because so many things that you said. Here you are in a field where you are helping people who have come to places where they feel broken. Their marriages have fallen apart. There is maybe child abuse. Maybe there is a child that gets taken from a home because the parents are not fit. So many things that speak to the breaking down of humanity. And here you're speaking about movies like What the Bleep, like things that are of a spiritual nature, which is about helping us remember the wholeness, the goodness, the perfection of the soul. So in your opinion, how do you see people go from being these whole perfect souls that, as the way I see it, we choose to incarnate on this planet, and we come upon this beautiful, what I call a playground, whole, perfect, and complete. And I believe you mentioned to me that you have a young child, and I've got a new grandbaby. My grandbaby we just celebrated Ryder's first birthday, and your child is what, I think you said 10 months?
Yep, 10 months.
So we look at these perfect little beings that come in whole, perfect, complete, and yet through life end up in places where there's neglect, abuse, divorce, just so many social ills. How do you see that trajectory happening? Because the work that I do is to help people come back to their wholeness, is to go on the bridge backwards, to unlearn all the things that have them feel broken and return to their essence. That's what this whole program is about, aligning with that which was already whole, perfect, and complete from the get-go. So how do you see that process unfolding where people end up broken and needing an attorney?
Well, if you answer that question from more of a metaphysical, spiritual perspective, I do believe that we come into this world with a purpose, and there's obviously there's free will, but I do believe that we don't have control over everything that happens to us, and we may encounter certain obstacles or challenges in our life. And, initially, I don't know if you're familiar with the hero's journey. Joseph Campbell talked about this idea that we encounter these challenges, and initially we may fail or get knocked down or experience unhappiness. From a psychological perspective, that shows up in depression or anxiety or trauma or PTSD. And then we may reach a point after struggling or failing where we realize, I'm not happy right now. My life's not working. And that's where then the type of work that you do as a coach, or that psychologist, or that other spiritual mentors can come and take a look at you and say, okay, what have I gone through in my life? how has it affected me? How has it affected some of my behavior and thinking? And, how can I then adjust that thinking and behavior to produce a greater experience in life? Is that helpful?
Oh yeah, absolutely. I completely align with that. We all do go through that a hero's journey, if you will,
Yeah.
to come back and reconnect and reclaim the truth of who we are. So share a little bit about your own personal hero's journey, because as I look at your blog, in watching quite a few of the videos, you share a lot about your life as well as the person that you're interviewing and having a conversation with. So I've gotten to learn a little bit about you, but obviously not everything. Take us through your own personal hero's journey, because it even though the way that Joseph Campbell laid it out, and I do believe from all of my years, my experience in coaching, everybody's steps are very similar. The how they go about them looks different. The character is different. The costumes are different. The sound effects and all of that, the scenarios are different, but the steps are pretty much the same, which actually I find also through studying A Course in Miracles, it breaks down the steps very much. It's the same. And in your own personal journey, what did that hero's journey look like?
Yeah, so that's a great question. And one thing that I like about the hero's journey is it starts with this call to adventure, or even the Course in Miracles calls it this inner voice. And this was actually a very foreign concept for me. Back in college, I was no idea what any of this meant. I started off as a finance major. I was very focused on just like getting good grades. I wanted to be a financial investor and make a lot of money and help a lot of other people make money. Then I went to law school. So I'm very analytical, highly rational, logic oriented. And then all of a sudden I start reading these books about following your intuition, or the Course in Miracles talks about this inner voice, or, having this like inner guidance system, even if it doesn't make logical or rational sense. But I kind of like tested the waters with this and found that, okay, I was at the very least, I was experiencing some greater levels of peace and happiness doing this. So that helped me learn to trust that voice. And if you look at the hero's adventure, they said there's this call to adventure. Well, for me, this call to adventure was, I'd grown up in Indiana and spent my whole life in Indiana. And then I got hired to work for the William Morris Agency, which is like literally in Beverly Hills, like the heart of the entertainment capital. This call to adventure. Well, I mean, at the time, my ego was pretty high, and I'm like, oh, this is going to be great. I'm going to be famous. I'm going to be working with all these famous people. And I mean, I had some noble intentions, but it's just very naive. And then the next step of the hero's journey is, I mean, you struggle and you fail. And I mean, I went out there, and most objective people would look at what I went through as a failure. I mean, I only spent probably about a year out there. I moved back to Indiana. I got another job as a lawyer, spent 2 or 3 more years working as a lawyer. Really struggled with that. There were times when I was out of work. I mean, I had a law degree. I mean, I had worked as a lawyer, but I was spent almost a year completely unemployed, really wondering what I'm going to do. So that's like that, look at the hero's journey. I didn't know about it at the time, but it's like this period of struggling. And then it's like, you still have this free choice. Do you want to answer that call? Do you want to answer that inner voice? And I really questioned that. I mean, there's part of me that thought like, okay, I followed my inner voice, this voice that I'd done A Course in Miracles. I'd followed the voice. I'd followed this call of adventure. And I really just kind of like ran flat on my face. So I'm thinking like, why did I do this? What's the purpose of all of this? But I was kind of at a crossroads there where it's like, okay, I can keep following this voice, or I can, give up on it. But I kept answering that call to adventure. And it was, the next step was like, let's leave law and go into psychology. And then when I made that switch, it was just like, oh, I'm home, and I feel like I found this wholeness that I was missing. And then that end of the hero's journey is like giving back to people. So then it's like, how can I help other people go through these similar struggles? So yeah, that's definitely something that I can relate to.
Oh, thank you so much for sharing that. And this is where, the similar steps, but they were very different. For me, I followed the path of becoming, educated, becoming a mom, and I was in a career in sales, pretty much most of my corporate life, sales,
Wow.
advertising sales, and then I went into real estate sales. And it was all about making money, looking good, making sure my family had what it needed, because we lived in an affluent suburb of Atlanta. And we all had a standard to uphold, including we all drove pretty much the same looking SUVs. I mean, it was just like I lived the life that I was supposed to have.
Right.
And my call to adventure was didn't start until I was 41. And
Oh.
that call to adventure was actually my mom's passing. It sent me into this really depressed and very fearful place. That I had grown up Catholic, and all of a sudden death became really serious to me. And I realized that I was scared of dying and going to hell, because I I knew my mom had to go to hell. I knew my mom really well, and I knew what she'd done. So she was definitely in hell. And I then began to feel this fear for hell, and of going to hell. So my adventure began in reading books that began to just make my mind explode. I read books about a person who had a near death experience and encounter God. And she also grew up Catholic like I did. And she meets God, and God's like, no, there is no hell. There is nothing horrible. This is you, you are beloved of mine. I'm so grateful, for you. And it was a love fest. And then I read another book about right after that one, past lives. And this doctor, maybe you're familiar with Dr. Brian Weiss, who
Yeah.
did so many past life regressions, and thousands of people in his clinic who went to past lives. And when they would come out of their state that they had been in, hypnotic state, they had no recollection about what they had just talked about. And I began to realize, okay, so there is no future hell, and we've had lots of past lives. So what we are is actually eternal. So life is a circle. So there is no need to be afraid of death. So that began the adventure of, I cannot wait to learn more about this. And I literally walked away from that journey of real estate and making a lot of money and all the things, that the trappings that go with it, because the call to adventure was, I was beginning to have encounters with the presence that, people know as Jesus. And it began to give me guidance, and began to give me, to tell me that I was going to become a spiritual teacher. And I was like, what? And before I knew it, I entered into this career and opened up a center, and
Wow.
called it the Center for Awareness, and stepped into helping people become self-aware.
Wow.
So it, like you, it's like a 180. It was all about the status and the money and keeping up with the Joneses. And then it became about my passion and helping people, and going then through the journey of letting go of attachments to money, to status, to all of those things, which was quite painful. Share some of the processes that you went through to help you align with your actual purpose, once you realized that it wasn't down that path of the legal path, that you wanted to be in service to people finding their passion, their joy.
Yeah, so this did take a long process for me. It did not happen overnight. That's why sometimes when people come to me and they say, I work with people and they're like, I don't know what my life purpose is. And I'm like, okay, that might take a while, but there are some steps that you can go, between you and me and your audience. I mean, I always did try to pay attention to that inner voice and that intuition. And I felt like I could trust that. And that was guiding me somewhere, even if I didn't know exactly where it was going. But there were some very other specific tools or steps that I did. One was, I had always been focused on what I was doing, like what was my job, what was my title, what was I accomplishing. And there's a time when I was out of work where I wasn't doing anything. So which at the time was kind of terrifying for me, but it also, instead of focusing on what I was doing, I asked myself, who did I want to be? And then I started asking myself, like, what were the qualities that I wanted to become? And for me, the two that kept coming up was, I wanted to be inspiration and I wanted to be authentic. So then I looked for ways to be inspiring and to be authentic. I didn't know what that was going to be or where that was going to take me, but now, incidentally, like, one of my greatest joys as a psychologist and as a coach is inspiring other people to be their most authentic selves. And along that path, I started asking other questions, like, how can I be of service to other people? Like, how can I contribute value to other people's lives? And I looked for ways to do that, like, even if I wasn't going to make any money. So I started volunteering for nonprofits, and I would give talks to nonprofit organizations and high schools and colleges on how people can create a meaningful career path and how they can follow their passions. And I was doing this for free, and it turned out that I loved doing it. And then started realizing, like, man, I really love helping people, and I'm really interested in counseling. I'm really interested in psychology. So then it's like trying to pay attention to, like, what am I passionate about? What do I enjoy doing? Well, helping other people with psychology and spirituality. What are some of my values? Being inspiration. Who do I want to become? How can I be of service to people? So, I mean, I did start to ask some of those questions, and then I looked for meaningful ways to take action on those. And then eventually that led me to being a psychologist and a coach, and also with my blog too.
Oh, that's so wonderful. And yes, everybody wants a magic pill, and they want to take the red pill and wake up, right
Yeah.
away. But my journey, I'm going 20 years. That
Yeah.
process started for me 20 years in 2002. So 20 years in August. And it is an ongoing,
Yeah.
absolutely ongoing journey. And being in service to others definitely became something that was from the get-go. Once I began to realize that I could shift my perception, that I could literally change my mind and transform my life, I knew this is the best kept secret. Everybody needs to know this. And definitely the volunteering came right away, and sharing this with as many people as I could possibly share it with. What are some of the teachings that were instrumental in helping you on this journey? Because through these conversations, one of the things that I love for people to receive, besides being inspired, like you were talking about, is for them to also get some tools, get some tips, some nuggets of maybe what either they've studied it or not, but maybe something that they might want to revisit. But what are some of the teachings or teachers that you would want to highlight?
Yeah. So for me, I have always been interested in integrating psychology and spirituality, or people who have a more either grounded spirituality or more of a holistic psychology. And so for me, one of the first teachers was Wayne Dyer. He wrote a book called Power of Intention. And that was really about, focusing allowing inspiration to guide your life, not necessarily going after what you think that you need to be successful, rather letting those ideas that inspire you move you. And he really kind of exposed me to this idea of following your intuition. He called it trusting your higher self, and really being open to these inspirations and synchronicities and meaningful coincidences. So he was probably one of the first teachers that I really listened and liked. And then I will say I've completed A Course in Miracles twice. The first time was probably about 15 years ago, and the second time was this past year. That book, I think, really can give anyone the tools that they need to really focus your thinking on how to find peace and purpose in your life. But I could go on. There's so many more people out there. There's another guy I really like named Jeff Brown, who happens to be an attorney, who quit his job as an attorney to be a psychotherapist, who talks about having a grounded spirituality. And another woman who I've interviewed for my blog named Vicky King, who does a lot of work with people on a very metaphysical, spiritual level too. So, I mean, I could probably name 10 more, but those are just the 4 that jump to my mind right now.
Well, people can go to your spiritual media blog, and they'll be exposed to a lot of those people that they are teachers, and also many who have written books, and lots of information out there. So let me just touch base on those 2 that you mentioned, because they were actually part of my journey. Wayne Dyer, The Power of Intention.
Yeah.
That was my first book that exposed me to Wayne Dyer. And from that, I began to study other books. So that was really, really wonderful, because that book, it was so simply written and easy to read, very easy to read, but it was blowing my mind, because I had no idea how much of my life I was operating on autopilot. I was just doing the things that I needed to do to accomplish the one goal, which was really, I'm going to probably 2 goals: make money and look good. And not just look good physically, but look good to the community. I needed to make sure that everybody saw Laina as this, perfect mom, perfect realtor, perfect whatever neighbor. So I was living my life on autopilot to make sure that the outside validated me. And then I got compensated, made a lot of money. And Wayne Dyer's book began to help me see, like, some of the things you were talking about, being inner guided, allowing that inner voice to speak to me. And I had no idea how blocked that channel was for me. It's like I couldn't tune the dial to that station, my inner voice, because all the other channels, it's like they were pre-programmed to only listen to my egoic voice, the voice that had me think that I just wasn't enough and I needed to keep doing to prove myself. So that was a powerful, powerful teaching. I highly recommend people read anything by Dr. Wayne Dyer. And it's really interesting watching his life later on, as I became more mature on my own journey, going back and reading some of his different books and watching the progression of his life. I could see the hero's journey that he was on, and I could see the softening. And he was a student also of A Course in Miracles. And I saw him soften, moving from the psychological awareness in his head to a place in his heart where he was just absolutely, I mean, I'm going to say he experienced his enlightenment. And I got to see him in person maybe about a year before his transition.
Wow.
If that, might have even been 6 months prior to his transition. And I could see the shift. And the shift that I observed him embody is exactly what the Course in Miracles has taught me is possible.
Yeah, I mean, that's such a good example. I mean, and he really later in his life, he really did deal with some pretty serious challenges. And have you read his memoir, the last book that he wrote?
I don't believe so.
It's really good. Ah, man, I forget the name of it, but it came out like a year before he died, and it's written more as a memoir. But it's interesting because he mentions that softening that you talk about in the book. He doesn't go into a lot of detail, but he talks about how it was either a woman he was married to or a woman he had a relationship with was unfaithful to him, and that led him to experience some melancholy. But he said that that really opened him up to experience a greater level of compassion and empathy for other people. And then I think he also had experienced some other pretty serious health issues too. But throughout all of that, I think you're right. You saw him become more compassionate, loving, kind. I mean, he's always a kind, loving man, but he just became, like you said, I think more softer and a little more empathetic with some of the things that he wrote and talked about.
Yes, well, in the Course in Miracles, and I started reading it, I want to say in 2010 is the first time that I read a book about A Course in Miracles.
Yeah.
And I was, prior to that, I taught a course that was inspired to me by Jesus. And it's called The Power of Awareness. And in my course for 5-6 years prior to that, I would teach that we have two voices, the voice of God, the voice of the ego. And
Yeah.
people would ask me if my course was based on A Course in Miracles, but I did not know the Course in Miracles. I thought it was something Marianne Williamson had written, but I wasn't familiar with it. And then finally I read a book about A Course in Miracles, and then that led me to want to read the course. And it made perfect sense why my students thought that my teachings were based on the course, but my Power of Awareness course is like the cliff notes to A Course in Miracles, even though it takes us 5 days to get through that workshop. But what I discovered in the Course in Miracles, and it actually happened for me starting around 2012, I was in a marriage that was starting to break down. And through that divorce, I wanted to embody one of the characteristics of a teacher of God, which to me just signifies, one who is operating in mastery or awake or enlightened, however you want to call it. And I wanted to get to that. And that characteristic was the characteristic of gentleness.
Yeah.
And I wanted to, because, I'd already been divorced from my kid's dad, and this was another marriage. And I wanted to make sure that I moved through that with absolute, complete gentleness. But I didn't know how to be gentle with who was attacking me.
Yeah.
I had to soften. I had to go inside and find the place in me that was both gentle and strong at the same time.
Right.
I always thought it was one or the other.
Yeah. That's a great example. I appreciate you sharing that. And yeah, I mean, finding that balance of gentleness and strength, I think that is something that the Course in Miracles helps with. And I remember for me, the second time I read it, which was just a couple of years ago, I did not realize how many like attack thoughts were going through my mind. And it was a really eye opener, like, wow, these are just my ego is still so active. It's just like, I was like almost like manufacturing conflict that wasn't there. I would be sitting there and thinking like, okay, I can't believe this person did this. If this person does that, then I'll do this and and then, I mean, I think there is one line in the Course in Miracles where it's just like the essence was like, lay down your guns, lay down there's nothing to attack. And I think that doesn't mean you just, roll over, but it means like, you don't have to be filled with so much anger and attack thoughts. And if you can replace that with forgiveness and paying attention to that voice, you'll be guided to find whatever you need.
Yeah, Absolutely. Along those lines with what you were just sharing, something that was very profound for me that helped me begin the process of moving into my gentleness was the line in the course that says, my attack thoughts are attacking me.
Yeah.
And when I
Yeah.
realized all this ego talk that I thought
Right.
was attacking everybody else,
Yeah.
was always attacking me.
I
I
know.
was the one suffering. I was the one in pain. I was the one in confusion and in insanity. So yeah, thanks for bringing that up because that is profound. What were some of the realizations that you had and maybe practical examples of shifts that you made that allowed you to really begin to quiet the voice of the ego, which is the attacker?
Yeah. So I think the first step in that is just becoming aware of those thoughts and and then the second thing, and this is where I really admire the Course in Miracles and the people who complete it, is it takes a lot of discipline. I mean, if you can, but it works. So like one thing that can really help to undo some of those attack thoughts is if like, every hour you pick one thought that you're going to think no matter what's going on. And so maybe that thought is, I don't need to have these attack thoughts right now, or I am going to listen to the voice of God right now, or the voice of the Holy Spirit will guide me to whatever I need. So if you can actually pick one thought that really resonates with you and then make an effort like every hour to think that thought and repeat it, that can definitely, that's what really helped connect me. Like even if I didn't quite understand it, that really, it retrained my mind. And I started to realize like, wow, I've got a lot of crappy thoughts going through my mind that could really be replaced here.
Oh, that's a great example. And so to my earlier point, um, those crappy thoughts is because our minds are untrained, as you were saying.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
that being able to see it in me, I was able to understand why my former husband was having such crappy thoughts towards me as well.
Yeah.
And that allowed me to generalize it, to begin to see that that's why the world needs attorneys, because
Yeah.
we can't communicate with each other anymore.
Right.
We've lost the ability to be able to share what's on our heart, to share what's in our mind, because we've got these attack thoughts that are literally sabotaging our mind. I mean, it's like I say that it's the ego has hijacked us and we're not even
Yeah.
there. We've got all these thoughts running the show, and they will not go anywhere but into destroying love at every
Yeah.
possible turn, destroying happiness, destroying
Right.
joy. So when I look at people who are in a state of confusion, of misery, of suffering, is simply because they don't understand that their mind is on an autopilot, repeating, regurgitating old thinking.
Yeah.
And if they knew just to interrupt it with one thought, like you said, that they have the ability, because to me, that was one of the biggest ahas, was
Yeah.
that, you mean I don't have to believe my own thoughts?
Right.
I really
Yeah.
don't have to agree with what I think
Yes.
is right?
Yes. Yeah.
That was so transforming for me, because then I was able to observe my thoughts and question my thoughts so that I could at some point choose my thoughts. So it does take quite a few steps.
It does, but you're right. I mean, just simply asking yourself, is this thought helpful? Is this thought true? Is it really worthwhile for me to get so angry about this? Is that going to really help things? And that doesn't mean you just like roll over and let people walk over you, but that means you've let go of some of these attack thoughts, which then allows you to quiet yourself and connect with that voice, which then you can move forward with love and with clarity and purpose, and you can set boundaries, but they come from a state of love as opposed to a state of like trying to, you know, attack or, you know, play this war game with other people.
Oh, absolutely. Let's shift the conversation because we've talked about the attack dogs, not what brought us here. Share with me your journey in listening to that inner voice and listening to the Holy Spirit. What has that been like for you, and how has that transformed you?
I mean, it's probably been one of the most transformational areas of my life, but it's also been extremely challenging because I mean, I remember, you know, when I first read some of these books about trusting your intuition or paying attention to that voice, it was so foreign to me. I mean, I was very rational, very analytical. I was a lawyer. And so it was just almost like I was like testing this so much. And it also kind of led me to some kind of outcomes that didn't necessarily seem right. Like I trusted it and I became a lawyer and it didn't work. But then I sort of, what I always realized and what I sort of came to believe was like, okay, when I'm following this voice, I experience a peace that passes understanding. It's like, I don't understand this, but I know it feels real, it feels true, and it feels peaceful to me. And incidentally, over time, it's also more often than not, it creates better outcomes than I could have ever planned or imagined. I could have never planned or imagined, you know, I'm going to be a lawyer and then I'm going to be a psychologist. But then I look back and what that has created for my life has been really pretty phenomenal and something I never could have planned out on my own thinking.
So what are some of the steps that you go through in your practice to align with that voice? Because for
Yeah.
me, not only did I need to learn how to align with the voice, but then I had to learn how to stay aligned.
Right.
And that's
Right.
still ongoing and ongoing.
Right. Right. So from a very technical perspective, um, a lot of times I'll use my body as a guide. So I will try to visualize if I say I have two decisions that I want to make, I visualize myself making one decision and I see how that feels in my body. And if that makes my body feel weak or tight or stressed, then I sort of realize, okay, that's probably not the right way to go. But then there's other times when I'll visualize another idea and like my shoulders will relax and I feel strong and I feel like, so that for me, using my body, that gives me some guidance. Other times it's more of like an intuitive knowingness. It's like, okay, I know in my heart and my guts, my instincts, my intuition, that when I go in this direction, it just feels right to me. Like it feels this peace. Another thing that sometimes can be helpful is experiencing synchronicity or meaningful coincidences. I'll be, you know, wondering if I should make a certain decision or not. And then somebody out of the blue will just like bring something up that's in alignment with that. And I'm just like, oh, okay, this is, you know, evidence. But I think some things that can really help to get that clarity is to develop very disciplined practices. So like I try to make sure, I mean, I've got a 10-month-old son at home, so this is not easy. But I'll get up. I usually get up around 4:30, which is about 10 minutes before he gets up. And then I'll meditate for 10 minutes. And then he usually goes to sleep around 6:30 or 7. And after he goes to sleep, I'll try to do about 20 to 30 minutes of yoga and another 10 or 15 minutes of meditation. And I try to read something from A Course in Miracles and try to do just some like stream of consciousness journaling. So carving out that time, that quiet time for me to connect with my spirit, that really helps me to stay in alignment.
Oh, wow. And to do that with a 10-month-old, you know, that says a lot about your dedication to your practice, because I know it's not easy, even though I've been helping my daughter. Well, her husband is away on some work projects, so I've been hanging out with them a lot. for almost 6 weeks. Well, no, it was about 7 or 8 weeks over the last 2 months. It's just been amazing. Try to maintain my practice while I'm trying to
Yeah.
cope with my little grandbaby, because they do require so much time and they're unpredictable in their
I
schedule.
know, I know. I mean, it definitely have to be flexible. I mean, I can't always do this every single day. And I have a tremendously supportive wife, so we try to support each other with the best we can, which helps a lot too.
Absolutely. That is so wonderful. So thank you for sharing how, your practice. But something that I also, now to kind of change topics a little bit, in your blog, the spiritual media blog, you interview so many people. You have so many different stories, so many different ways that people have connected, have come to align with truth, and then they share the processes that they teach, that they discovered, and it's such a generous blog in terms of getting lots of information. How have you personally been transformed by all those interviews that you've done? Because I know I've done this might be like 130, if not more.
Wow.
And it's very transformational. How have you been impacted? And maybe what stands out as some of those experiences that you've had?
It's very transformational. And for me, I think probably the most inspiring thing is to hear what other people have overcome, and their responses to particular challenges in life. And that is twofold. One, I've talked to some, like, I'm sure you have too, like well-known authors or healers, and hearing how they have struggled in life. I mean, that has sort of validated, like, okay, it's okay to struggle. That's part of life. But if you stick with it, you can get to the other side. Most recently, I mean, I interviewed a woman named Karen Johnson, whose son had died from a heroin overdose. And she talked about just the stages of despair and grief that she went through. And then she talked about how that transformed her life, how she incidentally had been working as a federal judge. She left her job as a judge. She went on this 2-year journey where she became a shaman, and now she works as a full-time shaman. She's an author at Hay House. And she talked about how this event, her son's death, was so sad and tragic, and she struggled with it. But through that struggle, she found her purpose and a sense of peace. And so to hear those challenges that other people go through is very inspiring. Another woman who I interviewed once, Vicky King, she actually does work out in the entertainment industry, and she had a house in Malibu that burned down in the fires. And I asked her, I was like, weren't you worried or anxious about that? And her response just struck me. She said, no, I wasn't anxious. I wasn't worried at all. I just figured, this is a call to adventure. This is just another adventure that I'm going through. And so now it's like, if something like unexpected happens to me, I actually think of Vicky King. I'm like, okay, if her house just burned down and she looked at that as an adventure, then if something, comes to me out of the blue, like, okay, maybe this is just another adventure that I'm going to go through, even if I don't quite understand it. So, I mean, just hearing what people have gone through, and how they've struggled but come through out the other side has been really inspiring.
Oh, that's wonderful.
Yeah.
I don't remember her story, so I'm gonna have to go back and read that. You said Vicky King?
Yeah, I mean, this was just more of a personal story. She wrote this book called The Inner Movie Method, and it's about how to write a movie. But it was ironically featured on the TV show Sopranos. And so she works with people on a very spiritual level. She does like her own consulting. And I got to know her through the Spiritual Cinema Circle, which was this spiritual DVD club that she had done some consulting work for. But she's a really, really interesting person who I've had a chance to talk to.
Oh, wonderful. So yes, there are so many people who, when once we discover that we can let go of attachments,
Yeah.
real things,
Yeah.
we can move through any circumstance, any situation, not
Yeah.
feel the sadness
Right.
of the shift, but we don't have to get sucked into the suffering of it.
Right. It's like you said, like the simultaneous like humanity, but then also just how incredibly spiritually connected they are. I mean, I'm not sure if you're familiar with Neil Donald Walsh, but he wrote Conversations with God. I mean, I had a conversation with him about his experiencing being homeless, and that was just very, very touching just to hear. I mean, even with the success that he's experienced, you could tell that that still is something that is so like impactful and even just a poignant experience that he went through. So just to hear the challenges that some of these authors and speakers have gone through and how they've handled it. But now I'm also curious to hear some of the people that you've interviewed or how it's inspired you.
Oh my goodness. I deliberately haven't gone out to interview famous people.
Yeah.
And because I wanted it to be examples of ordinary people.
Okay.
And so many like you, especially this one gal going addiction, the child dying. I had a child who went through addiction. So I went through a 4-year, I call it our drug adventure. And that was very transformational. But I used the Course in Miracles to help my son move through his addiction.
Wow.
But other people who, they didn't have the tools at the time, and their child's death or severely affected by the addiction is what was a catalyst for transformation. But one interview that really stands out is a precious friend that I met. He came to one of my Course in Miracles classes that I offered at a local Unity church. And we started talking. He was, his wife had recently passed away, and he wanted to use A Course in Miracles to move through the grieving process. He knew that he didn't have to get sucked into just losing himself because of the death of his wife. And she had cancer. They knew it was a very fast moving cancer. So they were preparing. I think they had a few months, if I'm not mistaken. It was definitely less than a year to prepare for her death. So he was using the course to studying it, and came to the classes, and it's like, okay, I need to be ready. I'm about to go through the death of my wife. I need to be ready. Oh. And when we had our conversation, it was after she had passed, and it was absolutely so powerful because, as you know, one of our greatest fears is death. So he was facing death before death came to his house, preparing for death coming. And what was so amazing with him in particular, just remembering him and thinking about him makes me want to cry. He used A Course in Miracles to be able to move through his wife's passing. And then I think it was about a year later, his son, who was just mentally not stable, actually ended up killing him. And when I read so many of the comments that people wrote on the Facebook page, because I knew him from coming to my class, but we were not close. And he lived in a different state. So I basically learned a lot about him through the Facebook page after his passing. And the things that people were writing, what an amazing teacher he was to them, of going through his own wife's death, and how he was so kind and so generous in helping other people, including his son. And the son killed him and his wife. So it was a double murder. But anyhow, what was so moving about reading was that he walked the talk until the very end. And people said, I know that he probably, as he was being shot, because that's how it happened, it prepared to be shot because, the son had to get the wife and him and whatever they needed to do to prepare for that what they called execution style murder. I know that he was forgiving him. I know that he was
Wow.
practicing what the course was saying because of the comments that people were writing. They knew that this is exactly where he had to be on his journey. And that's a
Wow.
testament to the Course in Miracles. So yes, I've witnessed ordinary people through
Wow.
extraordinary uh, shifts in consciousness and absolutely come on the other side gentle and peaceful and trusting and joyful and compassionate and open
Yeah.
and all those characteristics of a teacher of God.
Yeah. I mean, that's wow. That's pretty amazing. And you're right. I think, some of those experiences, whether we go through them or we hear about them, it does make us more compassionate. It does help us have more empathy. And so, yeah, sometimes those trials, we might not see it in the moment, but it can help us to have those greater levels of compassion and empathy.
I absolutely believe that. And as we start wrapping up this conversation, because of what we're just talking about, I'm feeling that I want to ask you to kind of complete the conversation by sharing, as we see what's happening in the world today, and I absolutely believe that we're in a battle between good and evil, between God and ego, between love and fear, between light and dark. I believe that part of humanity is listening to the voice within and wanting to do the good, right thing. And there's the rest that is listening to the voice of the ego in selfishness and greed and corruption and deception and attack thoughts. From what you have discovered about your own journey and all of the clients that you have worked with over all of these years, how can we shift faster towards the creation of a new earth, towards the creation of more people aligned with the voice of the Holy Spirit, God within? What do you see would be the fastest way for us to get there?
I think just asking a simple question, how can I be of service? Or, if people are more spiritually inclined, God, how can I serve you today? Or, when we ask that question too, sometimes we forget that we ourselves are children of God. So when we talk about serving others, we should also look for ways to serve ourselves. So figuring out, what can I do to make a positive impact, not only in other people's lives, but in my own life? Because when we are our best version of ourselves, doing our best, then that inspires other people to be their best as well too.
You sound like Gandhi. Be the change we want to see in the world, huh?
I guess, but yeah, I mean, it's really about trying to, I think it's, we trying to be of service to others, but also trying to be, create the best life possible for ourselves. Cause I mean, oftentimes we don't inspire other people by what we say or what we tell them, but by who we're being. I mean, it's just, some people walk into a room and they lift us up, and then we hear what they've been through, and then it inspires us even more. So it's just like, if you go out and create your best life, that's going to inspire other people to create theirs. And if you're able to provide some meaningful service or contribution to another person's life, that's also going to raise other people up.
Yeah, it is interesting. You're talking about that. How can we serve? But I think that the way that we got into the mess that humanity is in, which I see it as a divine mess, because it's helping us see what needs to be cleaned up.
Yeah.
is that we forgot to be in service to others, and we
Yeah.
forgot to tend to our own heart and practice our own alignment. So what you're suggesting is just the reversal of what got us into what we're in.
Yeah. Yeah. And I mean, again, some of these, it's like, focusing on what we have control over. And when we talk about service to others, that doesn't necessarily mean that you have to go out and, start a grand, like, international nonprofit. It can mean that, you're standing at the grocery store and you see somebody who's like struggling, and you just turn to them and you smile at them and just say, like, hey, how are you doing? Or, when you're practicing the course, like when you feel yourself about to get angry and snap at someone, you just calm yourself down. Even just how we act, in customer service situations, like, that was a big eye opener for me before I did the course. Is it's just like, when I get on the phone with like somebody who, like, I needed something done with, it's just like, okay, I just see this person as like almost like a means to an end. But it's like, if we treat this other person as like a real person, imagine what that does for them. I mean, I just, I this is a silly example, but I just leased a new car a month ago, and the guy who sold it to me, like, I gave him a perfect survey. Like, honestly, he didn't do a perfect job. And it took me like 2 or 3 months extra longer to get my car because of the supply shortage, but I gave him a perfect survey, and he texted me the next day, and it was like, thank you so much for that survey. Like, my coworkers think I'm a hero around here. Like, so, you can just do little things like that.
Oh, yes. Oh, well, the course has taught me that we are one, that
Yeah.
what I do to another, I actually am doing it to myself. And the joy that one feels in uplifting another is the very joy, the infusion of the frequency of the vibration of goodness. I mean, it's like,
Right.
it's as we give that goodness, we receive the
Yeah.
vibration. Like you were saying, you listen to your body. We always feel good when we uplift others.
Right.
So
Absolutely.
that is amazing.
Yeah.
Well, having this conversation with you has been so delightful. I'm so grateful that I got to know you, have my own experience with you than just watching your conversations with others. But tell our audience, how can they connect with you and find out, how to work with you?
So I have a coaching site that's drmatthewwelsh.com. That's drmatthewwelsh.com. I know that's a mouthful. But if you're my blog, which is, if you're interested in that, if you're an author or you just want to read articles or interviews with other writers or authors, you can go to spiritualmediablog.com. That's spiritualmediablog.com. Both ways are good ways to get a hold of me.
Oh, and I will put links in my YouTube where when I upload this under the tag of inspirational conversations. And of course, on my blog, you heard what he just said. So drmatthewwelsh.com and then spiritualmediablog.com also, right?
Yes.
And so I'm so grateful that you joined me so we could have this conversation. And I hope this inspires somebody. I always get a message about somebody who's inspired by just about every one of these conversations. So I know you will. And if you want to learn more about what I call the soul's journey, you can go to my website, lainaorlando.com, and you can sign up to receive a free video that will show you the 6 stages that we go through, similar to the hero's journey, but is specifically about our soul. The 3 phases that we move through, becoming unconscious and getting indoctrinated into our ego's voice. And then the 3 phases to move out of that, unlearn the egoic patternings and trainings and awaken the soul. Thank you again so much. I am so grateful for you. So if there's anything else you'd like to share or leave the audience with, by all means, you get the last word.
Oh, well, I just want to thank you for having this show, and thank you for the work you're doing and for having me on this show. It was a joy to be able to have this conversation.
Oh, awesome. Thank you so much.
All right.